In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint a watercolor white flower. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find art tips and techniques, business and social media training for artists. So please do consider subscribing. If you click the little bell icon, you'll get notified whenever I post a new video. So as you've probably discovered by now, watercolours are transparent, so traditionally artists don't tend to use white paint. If you use white paint, then you're kind of going into mixed media. So how on earth do you paint a white flower without using white paint? Well, it's all about the areas around the flower and about the shadows that you use. I'm going to point the camera down right now and show you how it's done. So here is the current painting I am working on. You can see I've already done the background. Now it's perfectly possible to paint white flowers on a white background, so you don't need the background around like this. You can paint white flowers on white paper, believe it or not, but it's a little bit more complicated, and I'll show you that in another video. So for this one we're going to keep it simple. So I've already put the background in. If you'd like to know how to do this particular background, I'll put it up in the information card so you can click on those. You won't go away from this video, but it'll line it up so you can watch it after this one. I've also got other videos. I'll put some links up as we go along, up in the information cards at the top of the screen, for instance, on how to do this wet into wet technique effectively. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rub out any excess pencil marks. Now I need these pencil marks here. They're going to show me where one petal is in front of another petal, so I need those. But there are other pencil marks like the ones around the outside here. I don't need those anymore. I really need to get rid of those, because the more paint I put on top, the more there's a likelihood that those pencil lines get blocked in. Now this paper is bone dry because I did the background a few days ago. So if you're painting it all in one go, you want to wait till it's dry, and then at any point where your picture is dry, you can start getting rid of as many of the pencil lines as possible. So I'm only going to keep in the ones that I need. Now in this case I've got what I would call sort of a simple flower. Now I'm not a botanist, these are something from the daisy family perhaps, but they've got this very simple shape. So in other words, they've got lots of petals around the edge, and then they've got the middles here. So the first thing I'm going to do with these is paint the middles. Now I'm not going to show you the whole process of painting both of these flowers because it would take a very long while and you would become very bored. So I'm going to show you just how I do one. If you'd like to see the finished painting, then you can pop along to my Facebook group, same name as this channel, so it's In the Studio with Michele Weber. I'm going to be using colours that I've more or less already used in the painting. So I've used cadmium yellow deep, and that's what I'm going to put in the middle here. So I've got two paint brushes. I've got a size 6 and a size 10. That would be what I do almost all of my painting with. I've also got this watercolour pencil in a golden brown. I've used it in these sort of hints of flowers in the background, so I'm going to use that as well because there are some speckles. So first of all, I'm going to start off by using the biggest paintbrush, and we're going to get some cadmium yellow deep. So I'm just going to pop this into the middle here. So if you have a little look at the photographs that I'm taking inspiration from, you'll see that there's a bit of an indentation in the center. There's some green around the edges, and there are some speckles as well. So we're going to do all of this while this center bit is wet. I'm not going to go too dark with it. It's a common misconception that you have to go really dark with watercolor paint to get brightness. That's not always the case, because if you go too dark, especially with flowers, the light doesn't show through, and then so you lose a bit of that beautiful transparency. So I've popped that paint in the middle, and I want just a bit of a neutral shade in the middle. So I'm going to use a colour that I've already used, which is some Daniel Smith manganese blue, and I'm also going to just use a little bit of one of my favourite pinks, which is a quinacridone pink. So that would be this one here. It's a blue-based pink, so it's going to sort of, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be combining the pink, the blue and the yellow so that I'll end up with a neutral colour. So I've mixed a bit of the blue and the pink together. Now that's given me a tiny touch of lilac, and I'm going to put some of that in the middle. Now because that's an opposite colour to my yellow, I should just end up with a little bit of dark in the centre there. It's bleeding out a little bit because the paint that I've gone in with is a bit wetter, but actually I quite like that, so I'm going to let that happen. Now around the edges I want some green. There's a touch of green around the edge of this this flower centre, so I'm going to go straight in with the manganese blue and just pop it literally directly around the edge there, and it will become green. You know, if you put blue and yellow on the paper, you will get green. There's nothing else that can happen, so we're putting that in at the same time. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to go in and work with my watercolor pencil. So here we are, and we've just got some little speckles around this flower. We're going to go round in that circular pattern. Now the colour's faded out of this centre bit a bit, so I think I'm going to go in a little bit stronger. I'm going to mix a stronger mix of that lilac that I used just now, and we'll pop that back in the middle. All we need to do now to this flower really is put a few shadows on the petals, and the rest is done for us really. We can see the edge of the petals here in the middle because we've got the centre of the flower here showing them up, and we can see the outside of the petals. It's really important that you don't go in with too much shadow, so you want to leave plenty of white on display so that you don't lose the whiteness of that flower. Now I have used Payne's Grey in this painting, so I could use some Payne's Grey on the petals, but I know from experience that it doesn't really work that well for flowers. It's a bit too hard edged, so it's easier for me to tell you really what not to use for the flower petal shadows than to tell you what to use. So I wouldn't recommend Payne's Grey. I would not recommend black or any kind of brown. As soon as you put brown onto flowers, they start to look dead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my own grey from the colours that I've already used. So if you remember, I mixed a lilac colour. I mixed it a little bit stronger at the end. So I've got this lilac colour here, which is the Daniel Smith Manganese Blue, and a little bit of Talon's Rembrandt Quinacridone Rose. Now I've got the red and the blue there, that's the pink and the blue. Now if I add yellow to it, that's the third primary, I will tip it into grey. Now as well as the cadmium yellow deep, I used a bit of SAA Primrose Yellow, which is almost like a pale opaque, slightly lemon yellow. So you can see as I add that, I start to get more of a grey colour, and I can push it in any direction I want. I can push it more towards a blue grey by adding more blue. I can make it warmer by adding more yellow, or we can stay with sort of a lilac colour. But whatever I do, I'm going to end up with a lovely, beautiful, soft grey that I can use on my petals. I've also got, as well as my water jars, I've got a separate water jar with clean water in, and I'm going to show you the process of adding the shadows. Now there may be some petals that are completely in shadow, and so it's a good idea to put those in first. Now you want to be looking at sort of flowers, petals that are at the back. So anything, when you're deciding where to put the shadows in, obviously you're going to go from your photographs and from your source material, but also shadows are always behind things, below things, and in the centre of things. So I'm going to look first of all for shadows that might be right at the back. I'm also going to consider where the light may be coming from. The background's a little lighter over here, so we'll perhaps think that some light is coming from this direction. So let's look at the petals that are over the other side. They would be the darkest and the ones that are at the back. So let's be quite bold, and I'll put one here just in full shadow. That's a little bit strong, that colour, so I'm just going to water down the whole of the shadow colour that I mixed. So just popping a bit more water in it. You know, if you ever put your paintbrush on the paper and it suddenly goes too dark, don't panic at all. Just clean your brush, add a little bit of water and spread it out. So in this case, I'm putting this whole little petal here into shadow. Now there might be one or two areas like that. Here I'll probably only do one like that, and then I'm looking at getting shadows anywhere that curves away from me, anywhere that's behind anything else. So let's look at these three petals here. I've got one petal, two petal in the front, and one petal behind. Now shadows are very rarely hard edged on flowers. This one here, we've got the whole flower in shadow, the whole petal in shadow, so that's okay. But this one here, I want to fade it out to white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet that petal first. So it's quite small, so I'll have to be quite delicate. So I've got another brush here just with clean water on, and I'm going to put some clean water up the top end of the petal. Now I'm being very careful here not to take the water over onto the next petal, and the way I'll do that is just go close to the pencil line but not right up to it, and I'm going to leave the paper on this part here dry. So we're taking some water on the outside of that, and then what we're going to do with our other little brush is just take the shadow in there and then pull it out until it hits the water. Now it's really important that you don't go on with incredibly drippy wet paint, because it will bleed very heavily and you won't get this kind of control. So what I'm looking for is that I delineate every edge around. So I need to delineate the edge of this petal here in front so that we can see what we should be able to do is we should be able to rub out all the pencil lines, and for everything to still show and for people to be able to see where one petal is in front of and behind another one. So there's another petal done. I think that looks fine. So look at this one here. We've got several things going on here. We've got this petal is behind the front one, this petal is behind all of them, these petals either side are behind those. So we're looking at going behind. Another area I might want to put shadow is in the near in the center here, because the flower actually, if you imagine, the flower dips in at the center, and so anywhere that goes away from you, you can help make the viewer see that in terms of a sort of a visual illusion, because obviously the paper's flat, we want it to be three-dimensional. You can make the viewer see that by putting a little bit of shadow down near that center of the flower. So what I'm going to do is wet this petal, and then again with a tiny little bit of shadow color on my brush, I'm just going to go to this part here and pull that up. Now I probably need to get a bit of shadow around this one behind. I'll even I think I'll drop a little bit here as well, so you get the idea that it's curving up towards you in the middle. Light areas come towards you, so any part of the petals that come towards you, keep them white. Now, as I said, I could do this petal behind, but I don't want to do it yet because the one in front is still wet. So what I'm going to do now is work around this whole flower, and I'm going to work on petal by petal, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not working next to any petal that's damp from previous water application. So rather than staying in this area and working around this petal, I'm going to move across to another part of the flower and come back to this when it's dry. This is really important because otherwise what will happen is you'll get bleeding between petals. Now you can see in the background I've used a completely different approach. We've gone really, really loose, but I want some sharpness here, so I'm going to be incredibly careful to let each petal dry. This is not fully what they would call a botanical approach. It's still a little bit looser than botanical because it's painted a little more simply, but I still want that sort of that precision. So let's have a look at some of these other areas here. Now this petal here is interesting. It's between these two top ones, so I think it can be mostly in shadow. I'm going to put a little bit of water there towards the end, and then we're going to go in behind those two front petals. So I'm taking the colour here, and again I need to wait until the centre of the flower is dry before working next to it, otherwise this paint would bleed in. So I've got some tissue paper here, and anytime I've got too much paint on my brush, I'm just giving it a dab. It's far better to dab the tissue like this than to press the tissue against your work. If you press it against your work, you're going to leave some very odd shapes. It is a technique that can be used for various things, but in this case I want to keep the shadows on these flowers really, really soft. And that's not blending out very well towards the top, so I'm just going to wet my little brush and just take some water in from the other side so that I keep that softness to it. You'll notice that I'm not leaving puddles in any of these areas of paint application, and that's because if I leave a puddle, then I'll get back runs and drying lines. So let's carry on and paint a few more petals. I won't make you watch me paint every single petal. I'll do a few, and then I'll take the camera away and put it back on at the end so you can see the finished effect. Now there's a little bit of petal here which I didn't notice, so I'm actually going to put this one in completely dark, so you get the idea of a shadowed petal behind there. Again, I'm not going to work next to this one until it's dry, because I would just make things bleed across. So I'm just going to keep working around, and I'm putting any shadows that I see anywhere that dips in. So I'm going to try and get shadowed areas around here, like I did here next to this bit here, because the petals curve in. I probably get some bits of shadow on the edges of the outer petals if they curve away. That's another thing I can do. And I certainly want to get shadow behind petals. So let's look at this petal here. This one here is behind it. This one here we've already painted, but it should be drying out, and we're not going to take the water right across to it anyway, so we're quite safe to do this one. So what we're going to do is put some water on here like this. So you want to make sure that the petal's wet, but you don't want to leave a puddle of water, because if you put a puddle of water you'll have no control over the water, over the paint that goes next to it. So it's all about controlling water levels. Now, because the manganese blue granulates slightly, I am dipping my brush in, and I'm stirring with each time I dip my brush in. That will ensure that I'll get the same colour each time. I have got another video on watercolour granulation. If it's not something you understand, or if it's been worrying you and you don't quite know how to use it effectively in your paintings, or how to avoid it when you want to avoid it, then I've got a video that I'll link to in the information cards, and you can watch that one too. So you can see I'm just working around these petals one at a time and getting some shadow colour in. Now it probably looks like I'm putting a lot of shadow in here, but on some of these petals over this side where it's lighter, and on some of the petals that are on the top, I'm going to put a lot less shadow in. So I'm just mostly working on the ones behind at the moment. So here's another one that's right behind, and it's behind two petals. So let's go in and do that one next. So exactly the same process. We've got clean water going on here, but not in a puddle. You need to put enough on, especially if it's a warm day, because it'll dry quickly. So you need to put enough in, but not in a puddle. Try to keep it just slightly within the pencil lines. You can always push it out with the paintbrush, but you don't want to go over the edge. The paint will follow the water over the edge, so you don't want to have the water anywhere that you don't want the paint going to. So again, I'm going to go in behind this petal and behind the other petal and take it up until it hits the clean water. It's starting to spread a bit much there, so I've just dried my brush off. Just going to lift a little bit of the water out. Now I need to have some shadow here, otherwise you won't be able to see this petal against this petal. So I'm just going to take that shadow just around that little bit of edge there as well. So here we are, and I've finished the shadow painting on the flower. So a couple of other things I did while the camera was turned off was I put another layer of paint on this center of the flower here. So you don't want to get too dark, but I felt that it wasn't giving me enough contrast. So you just keep layering up with watercolor until you get the desired effect. Now I went very carefully around the petals, and I tried to place this shadow color anywhere that was behind something, towards the center of something, in the middle of something. Of course I could have put more and more and more on, but it's so easy to lose the essence of a white flower or any white subject like snow. It's so easy to put too much shadow on. I can always add a bit later on. I've also got the stem to do here later, and I'll be darkening up various areas of the background to bring this flower even more to life and to get an even stronger contrast. And of course I've got the other flower to do as well. So I'll be doing lots more flower painting and watercolour tutorials on this channel, including lots of other ways of reserving white paper. If you're finding that you're making a lot of mistakes in your watercolour and you're finding it hard to correct them, I've got a fantastic video for you. It'll show you how to correct 10 of the most common watercolour mistakes, even after the paint's dried on your paper, and you can watch it right now.